She didn't look like power when she stepped into the wedding. No diamonds, no designer label, no entourage, just a plain navy dress, a quiet presence, and eyes that didn't flinch when they mocked her. The groom laughed first, loud and careless, pointing her out like a stain on his perfect day. What he didn't know was that the woman he humiliated in front of 100 guests and 1,000 phone cameras was the only reason his family business still existed. And by the time he realized who she really was, it was too late. The invitations had gone out months in advance, each one embossed in gold leaf and sealed in heavy ivory cardstock, the kind of invite that whispered old money and shouted exclusivity. When the wedding of Jonathan Reyes, heir to the Reyes real estate dynasty, finally arrived, the estate practically levitated from the weight of pride and privilege. Guests came dressed like royalty, designer gowns, silk ties, shoes that cost more than some people's rent. The groom basked in it, all eyes on him, his smile smug, rehearsed, camera ready. No one noticed her at first. She arrived alone, without entourage, in a dusty silver sedan that looked like it belonged to a valet instead of a guest. She stepped out in a dress so plain it looked almost defiant. Matte navy, knee-length, no labels, no lace. Her shoes were flat, her bag a simple leather satchel that didn't bear a single luxury brand logo. She wasn't old, but her face didn't scream for attention. She looked like someone who didn't need to be seen. She took a seat in the back row of the outdoor ceremony space, just behind a tall floral arrangement that all but swallowed her from view. She didn't pull out a phone or chat with the person beside her. She just watched as the groom flexed for the crowd, watched the whispers swirl like champagne bubbles around him, watched people turn toward her once they realized she wasn't dressed for their kind of party. And when the groom walked by, flanked by groomsmen who looked like magazine covers and security who treated the event like a royal summit, he slowed, sneered, and laughed. She caught it, the way his eyes dragged over her simple dress, the way his lips curled like she was something scraped off a shoe. The words he mouthed to his best man were cruel, dismissive, a nobody, lost, crashing the wedding. Someone should have told her this wasn't a food bank line. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It was the kind that slithered through air like smoke, a little cruel, a little contagious, and fully intended to diminish. She didn't move. She didn't lower her gaze or fidget with her sleeves. She simply turned her head back to the altar, back to the over-polished rituals of privilege, and remained unmoved, because she'd been underestimated before. Because her dress cost $42, but her net worth was just shy of $9.8 billion. She had built her empire in silence. She never inherited anything except her mother's stubborn work ethic and a rusted-out truck she'd sold for scrap. Her company had acquired 5 tech startups in the last 6 months alone. She owned controlling interest in one of the largest private logistics firms in the country. The groom's father had once bid against her in a property auction and lost. He never knew who he'd been bidding against. She'd been invited quietly by the bride's cousin, a mutual investor who admired her discretion, her mind, and her refusal to entertain press. She didn't wear wealth. She didn't need to. People who lived to impress didn't know what to do with people who didn't care. By the time the vows were exchanged, most had forgotten about her, but not the groom. He couldn't stop stealing glances. He was unsettled by her calm, by the fact that she didn't leave when mocked, that she didn't try to explain herself, didn't seek validation. That kind of unshaken presence threatened him. During the reception, he made sure she was seated near the restroom hallway. Her name card, barely legible, was tucked beside a chipped wine glass. He'd made sure of it. He was the kind of man who punished what he couldn't understand. But she simply folded her napkin, laid it on her lap, and ate her salmon without complaint. There was power in restraint, power in silence. She didn't need to prove herself to a room that wore money like armor. She knew something they didn't, that the venue had been quietly saved from bankruptcy by a property management group that now owned 52% of the estate's holding company. Her group? that the very floor they danced on had been refinished by a contractor she employed, that the decorative fountain outside bore a plaque with her company's name etched beneath a veneer of marble and flowers. The irony would come later, and when it did, it would come hard, because the next day the groom would sit across from a boardroom table looking at the contract he needed to sign to save a development project on the verge of collapse. A billion-dollar deal, time-sensitive, riddled with legal complexity. The deal required one signature from a lead investor. Her signature. And he wouldn't know, at first, that she was the one behind the plain dress. The woman in the back row. The woman he mocked. Not yet. But regret, like a long shadow, was already beginning to stretch toward him. And the reckoning was coming. The wedding had gone viral. Not for the flower arrangements or the bride's imported gown or even the champagne tower that cost more than a new car. No, it was a 37-second video posted to social media by an anonymous guest that had turned the event from high society celebration into something else entirely. The clip showed the groom, Jonathan Reyes, pausing in the aisle as he walked toward the altar. The camera zoomed slightly as he turned his head, made a crude remark to his groomsmen, and pointed discreetly toward the back row. Then came the laugh. Low, mocking, caught on the wireless mic clipped to his collar. And finally, the woman in the plain navy dress, unmoving, unflinching. A ghost of a smile touched her lips before she turned away, calm and unreadable. The internet called her the woman in blue. Commenters speculated she was a scorned ex, a journalist, someone who had snuck in to protest the wedding. Theories flew, hashtags trended, but no one could find a single photo of her before that day. She had no digital footprint, no online presence, and that drove them wild. Jonathan ignored it at first. Just noise, he told himself. People obsessed with drama. The world would move on. Besides, his honeymoon was in 2 days. A private island, no Wi-Fi, total escape. He didn't have time for internet gossip. But by Monday morning, the situation had shifted. His father stood in the corner of his office, arms folded, fuming. A half-dozen executives from their corporate legal team sat in silence around the boardroom table. A massive deal, a commercial development in Chicago with tens of millions already sunk into permits and planning, had hit a wall. The investor backing the land acquisition had gone dark, and that investor held the swing vote. Jonathan had barely paid attention to the investor list when the contracts first circulated. It was all vetted, handled through brokers and holding companies. None of the names had stood out. Until now. Because when the lead counsel opened the files again, she found something strange. The main holding group, Orion Group Capital, had one executive signatory, a woman, listed as managing partner, majority owner, and strategic chair. The name, Rachel Claire M. No last name spelled out, just the initial, just like the investor liked it, discreet. But that wasn't what made Jonathan's stomach twist. It was the photo. It had taken someone on the legal team hours to find, buried in a 2017 Forbes article about emerging anonymous investors and stealth capital acquisition. A grainy, poorly lit picture of a woman standing near a dry erase board, face partially turned, wearing a navy dress. He didn't want to believe it. He sat back in his leather chair, staring at the printed image. It wasn't definitive, but it was close enough. The same posture, the same plainness that now radiated elegance in retrospect. The same expression, detached but not indifferent, calm, knowing. He remembered the laugh he'd aimed her way, the snide comment, the smirk. His ears burned. He tried to dismiss it, told himself she couldn't possibly hold that kind of power. A woman like that would have made a name. She would have been famous, flaunted it, leveraged it for branding. But then again, maybe not. Because power like that doesn't beg for attention. It commands it when it wants to. He made a few calls, tried to track down the contact who originally facilitated the investment. Got nowhere. The call center operator wouldn't even confirm a transfer. Legal told him that if the investor was who they suspected, she had the right to remain entirely invisible. The deal couldn't go through without her signature, and there was nothing he could do to compel it. He paced the length of his office, running a hand through his hair. Outside the tinted windows, Manhattan moved like it always did. Fast, self-important, indifferent. But for Jonathan, the city felt suddenly claustrophobic. He'd mocked a billionaire at his own wedding. And not just a billionaire, the single most critical stakeholder in a deal his family's firm desperately needed to close. He reached out through unofficial channels, sent a message through the bridal cousin who had invited her. No reply. Then he sent another, a longer one, this time with an apology folded carefully between vague regrets and desperate business language. Silence. Rachel said nothing. She didn't need to. She had already said everything by showing up, sitting quietly, and allowing him to bury himself in his own arrogance. That night, Jonathan lay awake in his penthouse suite, the sounds of traffic humming below like a heartbeat. His wife, the center of attention just days ago, now occupied a side room, fielding texts from reporters and fending off gossip about her husband's viral humiliation. The internet had taken Rachel's silence and turned it into a statement. And Jonathan knew, deep down, that this wasn't just about the deal. It was about what he had revealed in that moment, who he really was when no one told him to behave, how quickly he had discarded grace for ego, and how utterly he had failed to recognize quiet strength when it sat right in front of him. He was raised to believe power dressed a certain way, that it came with tailored suits and family names and watch collections that cost more than most mortgages. But that belief had just cost him more than money. It had cost him respect. And Rachel hadn't even raised her voice. Power doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it slips into the room like air, invisible and inescapable. For Jonathan Reyes, power had always looked like sharp suits and louder voices. Men who laughed too hard at their own jokes. Women whose confidence seemed sculpted, not grown. He'd been raised in a world where power was performed, not held. And then Rachel happened. The days after the wedding blurred into a parade of phone calls, blocked access, and internal crisis meetings. The Chicago development deal, the crown jewel of Reyes Corp's next quarter, was suspended. No signature, no access, no explanation. Jonathan tried calling the cousin again. No reply. Tried reaching out to former associates, investors, brokers, anyone who had worked with Orion Group Capital in the last 5 years. He got vague nods, quiet admiration, and fear. Rachel's reputation, it turned out, was built on quiet consistency and a brutal ability to see through posturing. She invested in outcomes, not promises, integrity, not image, and once she'd been crossed, she never returned. Still, Rachel said nothing. No press release. No public comment. She didn't need to justify herself. Her silence became louder than any scandal. In certain circles, people had already begun whispering her name with caution, even awe. She had become a myth in real time. The tipping point came a week after the wedding, at a real estate and finance symposium hosted in Manhattan, one of the most exclusive invite-only events on the East Coast. Reyes Corp was scheduled to unveil a new vertical housing partnership there, alongside city officials and foreign investors. Rachel had never attended in person before. She preferred private briefings, discreet negotiations. But this year, her name quietly appeared on the list of keynote observers. No one noticed her arrival. No fanfare. No entourage. Just a black town car, a simple charcoal coat, and that same air of composure. She moved through the grand foyer of the hotel like someone who wasn't used to being followed, but always remembered. Jonathan spotted her before the presentations began. She stood at the back of the room, beside a modest catering table, flipping through a folder, sipping tea. He froze. His voice caught in his throat. His stomach tightened with the guilt of someone seeing his reflection too clearly. She hadn't sent him a warning. She hadn't responded to his apology, but her presence now, in this room, said everything. When his firm's presentation began, the room was polite but distant. The foreign investors from Singapore, who had previously seemed eager, were cautious. Their questions were pointed, not warm. One even asked, off script, about the rumored investor pullout from the Chicago deal. Jonathan fumbled through a practiced answer. Everyone knew it wasn't the truth. Rachel didn't interrupt. She simply took her seat, notebook in her lap, listening. By the end of the second panel, murmurs were circulating. Someone had spotted her last name on the guest list, partially redacted as always, but it was enough. Industry insiders confirmed what the internet hadn't yet uncovered. She wasn't an eccentric rich woman or a mysterious outsider. She was the sole controller of 3 separate holding groups. She chaired the board of a private equity firm with international interests. She had sat in on closed-door sessions with heads of state and chaired philanthropy funds that quietly steered housing reform policy. She wasn't just wealth, she was leverage, and Jonathan had publicly insulted her for wearing a plain dress. That detail was now a case study in quiet humiliation. Later that day, in a private session with key investors and policymakers, Rachel finally spoke. She presented an analysis of housing equity and sustainable finance that unraveled 3 of Reyes Corp's foundational claims. Her tone remained calm, her data irrefutable, her recommendations subtle but deliberate. She never mentioned Jonathan by name. She didn't need to. By the time the presentation ended, half the attendees had revised their notes. One major stakeholder whispered to his assistant to pause all Reyes Corp funding proposals. Another nodded toward Rachel as she passed, a look of cautious admiration in his eyes. Jonathan sat frozen, jaw clenched. His empire, so carefully polished and projected, had been quietly sliced open with the sharp edge of her precision, and all without raised voices, lawsuits, or social media wars. Just presence. Just poise. Just the kind of authority that comes from knowing who you are when no one believes you belong. In the following days, the dominoes began to fall. Reyes Corp's stock slipped after investor pullbacks. Partnerships paused for ethical review. And Rachel? She didn't release a statement. She didn't bask in the fallout. She simply moved on, signed 3 new deals with firms that had witnessed the symposium in real time, scheduled a quiet site visit in Chicago, not to sabotage Jonathan's project, but to propose a more equitable one of her own in partnership with the city. She didn't need revenge. She had legacy. And Jonathan, left in the debris of his own arrogance, finally understood something no business school had taught him. Humiliation doesn't come from being ignored. It comes from realizing too late that you were seen and judged by someone whose judgment actually mattered. Rachel had given him no second chance, no closure, no vengeance, just silence. And in that silence, the full weight of her worth settled. Time moved on, as it always does, but some moments don't age, they calcify. The footage from the wedding still made its rounds in corporate training seminars, whispered through conference halls and discussed in hushed tones over catered lunches. Not because it was dramatic, but because it revealed something that business schools failed to teach. That humility isn't weakness, and silence is not surrender. And above it all, her image persisted. Rachel, the woman in the plain navy dress. She became a case study in power disguised as restraint, in elegance without artifice, in the kind of wealth that didn't announce itself but moved like a tectonic shift beneath the surface. Jonathan Reyes tried to rebuild. He released apologies, some written by PR teams, others in front of uncomfortable cameras. He went on podcasts to reflect and sat through charity galas hoping to be seen again, not as the man who mocked a billionaire, but as someone who had learned. But the truth about legacy is that it doesn't just build over time. It builds through choice. And Rachel had chosen to step back, not because she was vindictive, but because she had nothing to prove. Her company, Orion Group Capital, quietly expanded into educational reform. A new scholarship initiative was launched in her name, though she never attended the ribbon cutting. Schools received funding under anonymous titles. Hospitals began seeing equipment marked with coded serial donations tied to her firm. No press, no photos, just impact. And then came the building. In the heart of Chicago, on the same plot Reyes Corp had once hoped to dominate, a new urban housing development broke ground. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't branded, but it was efficient, beautiful in its simplicity, and designed to be both sustainable and affordable. City officials praised it. Urban planners studied it. Rachel never gave a speech at the opening. Instead, she walked the grounds 2 days before the ceremony, wearing a light gray coat, hands in her pockets, and simply watched. The workers didn't recognize her. That's how she preferred it. Legacy, she believed, wasn't about names on marble. It was about systems that kept working even when no one was watching. Jonathan visited the site 6 months later. Not for business, not for publicity, just to see it. He parked across the street, kept the engine running, and watched families move in. Single mothers carrying grocery bags, children chasing each other through landscaped walkways, an elderly man tending to a community garden. This was the very project his firm had mocked as idealistic nonsense, a charity stunt, a PR move. But now, standing there, watching real lives unfold, he saw it differently. He realized Rachel hadn't just responded to his insult. She had redefined the game he thought he was winning. She had taken the insult, the dismissal, the viral moment, and done what only the deeply powerful could do. She didn't correct the story. She replaced it. He left without speaking to anyone. No cameras, no notes. Just the quiet ache of someone who'd seen too late what dignity actually looked like. Years passed. The viral clip faded from trending pages but lived on in keynote talks and business ethics panels. Rachel remained elusive, seen only in glimpses, boarding a private jet with no security, sipping tea at an economic summit in Switzerland, sitting alone at a cafe in Nairobi reviewing handwritten notes while the world moved in blur around her. She became more than just a billionaire, more than an icon of restraint. She became a mirror, because in every boardroom where someone snickered at the wrong clothes, in every hiring panel that sized up a candidate by their shoes, in every gala where image outshouted intention, there was now a silent question hanging in the air. What if she's a Rachel? And that question reshaped the room. Jonathan never reclaimed his former spotlight. His business stayed afloat, but never soared. People listened when he spoke, but not like before. The shine had dulled, because people remembered the look on his face, not the moment he mocked her, but the moment he realized who she was. And that moment told them everything. Meanwhile, Rachel continued to build. Quietly, boldly, precisely. She didn't try to teach lessons. She simply lived the example. Because true legacy isn't broadcasted. It's felt, not in headlines, but in the silence that follows when the world finally learns to listen.